It's a pleasure to now invite Caroline Sheppard for the next keynote address. Caroline was the first chief adjudicator for London in 1992, and also the Traffic Penalty Tribunal, a post she held from 1999 to 2022. The Traffic Penalty Tribunal, or the TPT, is recognized worldwide as a benchmark for public online dispute resolution systems, a system she had the vision to create from scratch. While she humbly says that this was a result of unintended consequences, when you hear more about her story, you wonder, how did she think of so many things, all that she did back in 1999, when only a few of us had mobile phones, leave alone computers? And when some of you who Pramod hangs out with were not even born. What are all the things she had the vision to foresee? Keep the user at the center, not the process or technology. Designed for all users, not some, and especially the citizen. Give parties all the information and agency at the click of a button, and create roles for young, talented people. Now, today, about 25 part-time lawyers decide over 30,000 appeals a year at the TPT, with over 10% cases getting resolved within a day, and about 80% within a month. What was Caroline thinking? Let's hear from her. Please put your hands together for Caroline Sheppard, OBE.
Well, thank you very much, Ayesha, and thank you so much for inviting me to this wonderful city. It's really so exciting. And of course, having come from the Traffic Penalty Tribunal, seeing the traffic here in Bangalore is really quite an eye-opener. So I hope my next job's going to be here, quite frankly. You need me, I think. But basically, I am an imposter here, and I've been an imposter my whole life through this, because I had absolutely no idea that what I was doing was ODR. In fact, I'd never even heard of ODR until we were sort of quite far down the line. And I suddenly met Graham, Ross, and Colin, and they told me all about ODR, and that's what I was doing. And I went, really? God. Anyway, it's all about, as Ayesha said, it's all about the user and the user experience. Now, we all know about UX now. It's absolutely part of our common language. But way back, it never was. Now, I'm a barrister, and I was called to the bar about 40 years ago, and I was a woman, and I can tell you the user experience of being a woman at the bar was simply dreadful. And I'd turn up at court, and the client would say, I don't want to be represented by a woman, you won't know what you're doing. And then, of course, I got him off, so it was all right, but never mind. So then I joined the court service, the magistrates' courts in London. And I can tell you the user experience for users of the court was absolutely dreadful. And I saw outside here, there's a notice up on your board saying that courts are a service for citizens. Well, certainly the magistrates' courts when I worked there weren't. They were run for the magistrates, the police, the court staff who referred to the people who came to court as toe rags. It was absolutely disgraceful. And what's more, everybody was treated like a criminal, including motorists and people who were there because they got parking tickets. So they were all treated as if they were murderers. And I thought, well, this isn't right at all. So then I was suddenly, they needed somebody to run the parking ticket department and collect all the money that went to the government and the Bank of England. So I stuck my hand up and said, I'll do that. What we need is a computer. We've got to digitize all of this. And also, I managed to persuade the Bank of England to set up an office within the parking department so that they could just put the money straight into the Bank of England and cut out 20 clerks and also the High Street Bank. So I sort of was starting to think of user experiences. Then came the day when in London they said that parking was not going to be criminal anymore. It was going to be a civil offence with the local authorities issuing fines and keeping the money. Well, you can imagine what the public thought about that. So the only safeguard, because they couldn't go to court, was to have a tribunal, and I became the first chief adjudicator to set it up. But it was wonderful because I had a completely clean sheet, no legacy, so I thought, right, how are we going to make this better? So the first thing we did was when we had hearings, we had a hearing centre in the middle of London by Trafalgar Square, where people could come from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., just walk in, and we said, well, won't keep you waiting for more than 15 minutes, you'll see an adjudicator. We had the first digital case management system. So there was paper, but it was all scanned in. So all the adjudicators were working off screens and entering their decisions online. And I can tell you, Richard Susskind saw it way back then and got terribly excited about it, because it actually turned out to be the first one in the UK. You see, I was an imposter even then. So anyway, that worked incredibly well. And the other thing that happened then, critical, we were talking about vision engineering earlier. When they were writing the procedural regulations and I was consulted, I said, look, email is becoming the way of communicating. Believe it or not, all of you young people, this was really quite new then. And I said, I want electronic data transfer service into my tribunal. And so I got the first regulations in the UK back in the 1990s, which actually allowed service by electronic data transfer. And that actually paved the way for what I did 20 years later, because if I hadn't had that in the procedural regulations, then we wouldn't have been able to do what we did. So that was actually important. And so that ran fantastically well. And then suddenly, what they did in London, they decided to do in England and Wales. And so I then became the chief adjudicator for what was then called the Traffic Penalty Tribunal for England and Wales. And by that time, they'd extended parking to driving in bus lanes, yellow boxes, all the minor traffic stuff. And so the volume of penalties that were being issued were more and more and more, and more people wanted to appeal. And of course, motorists, well, you all know, everybody wants to appeal a ticket. So it was really important to let them have a chance to do it, but also to make it very quick and easy. So I had another chance at creating another new tribunal. Now, we'd had contractors in London building the first system, and to some extent I thought, right, we won't do that again. This time we'll have a small developer that we'll manage ourselves, and we will have staff dedicated to actually helping and with a mindset to help the users. And so we started with that, and at that stage I had adjudicators all around the country. Now, Ayesha mentioned how we nurtured talented lawyers. When I was in London, because we were open from 8 to 8, it meant that really bright lawyers could do a day's work at their firm or at the bar, and then come in the evening or a Saturday morning and be an adjudicator there. And so I got a really vibrant team of lawyers who were all committed to this new way of doing things. And the same thing happened when I went to England and Wales and TPT, because at that stage the adjudicators were all around the country, and so they were working to start with on digital discs, but they'd email their decisions. So they were kind of working online, the early stages of what I learnt was sort of ODR. And gradually, then, of course, the idea was to develop a system. Now, at that point, of course, Colin had done his tremendous stuff at eBay, and I kept saying, I want something that works like eBay. Why can't we do it for traffic? We must be able to do that. And so that's kind of what we were heading for and had in our sights with the vision, with everything we did, was leading up to it. And gradually, of course, as the internet and broadband became more common, that's when we started to develop our system. So our first one, we had a prototype. And first of all, I did it with just a few local authorities. At TPT, I had 350 local authorities in England and Wales who were all issuing these tickets for traffic offences. So the whole idea was to bring them on. Now, at this stage, I'll just go and say that the principle of building things for users is to deal with all the users. Now, of course, disputes have two sides. So just concentrating on one user actually isn't really, that's only half the dispute. So we had 4 users in our system. We had the appellants, the motorists. we had the local authorities, 350 of them. Then we had the adjudicators, 25 of them scattered around the country. And then we had the administrative staff. So we built the thing with those 4 users. So we built the appellant, we did it agile, we had an appellant sprint. Then we built the local authority sprint and we gave the local authorities dashboards. Then we worked with 4 local authorities who had the same mindset as us, who were determined to make it work as we were. Very important if you're doing a prototype. So the next thing we did were the adjudicators, because of course the admin staff had nothing to do. We'd written them out of it by mistake. We hadn't intended to, but the system we built meant that there was no admin to do. So the staff, who were wonderful, just went over to help the people we've just been hearing about and doing their cases by proxy. So people who weren't able to do it online or who didn't want to for some reason or didn't really sort of trust the system could get, one of the court staff would help them and would actually put their case on for them. So everybody else was online. And so the proxy cases actually served all the people who weren't able to use the online system. And by the way, throughout this conference, please, let's not forget those. We're going to be talking about ODR, but there are always going to be people who need to access justice for whatever their need is, and they may not be able to use it. So there always has to be a team like the team I had who was helping them through it if you're creating ODR systems. But anyway, it worked. And it was extraordinary. The local authorities suddenly produced all their evidence online. The other thing we did from right at the beginning was unbundle the bundles. Now, I don't know whether you all got bundle obsession, the way in the UK everyone has bundle obsession, which is huge, sort of wads of paper. For things like a parking ticket, it was absolutely ridiculous. So we just said to the local authorities, you can upload it, five bits of evidence, one by one. And in the past, the local authorities had taken maybe 2 hours to prepare a paper bundle. And so they were completely kind of invested in the case because they'd spent so long doing it. So the minute we put them online, they just went click, click, click. And they could just upload it like that. And suddenly their life was much easier. And the local authorities saved £200 a case straight away the minute we turned the system on. And by the way, always remember your stakeholders. It's not just your organisation you're dealing with your supply chain, so to speak. So they loved it. And the extraordinary consequence of the local authorities having a very easy and simple online way of communicating was they suddenly became terribly cooperative. Having been very difficult and intransigent and wanting to win all the time because they'd prepared a bundle, they suddenly sort of saw it sort of nicely set out. They could see what the issue was. They became very understanding. And suddenly we found ourselves being able to mediate a parking ticket penalty. I mean, it's, for any of you who are lawyers, I mean, to have a fixed penalty that you then start mediating. And it was entirely as a consequence of everybody doing this online, making it very clear, and for the adjudicator to be able to send messages that people replied to in real time. And because everyone's used to very quick communications these days, if an adjudicator sent out a message saying, could you just tell me about this bit? Then, the reply came back probably the same day, which is why we closed so many cases in one day. And so none of this was planned. That's why I'm an imposter, because I didn't start and say, we're going to do all this, and this is how our ODR system is going to be. You did the right thing. You look at the user, you look at their needs, whoever they are, and then you make it happen. And by the way, it's not all about technology. We're going to hear a lot about technology. It's as much about, first of all, the business processes you're doing. And in the law, the judges in particular are absolutely wedded to their processes. But you have to ask yourself, why have we got those processes? What is a purposive interpretation of the rules? Why was it done? And most of them were written for the post and for people dictating things to secretaries. Nowadays, if you look at the purpose, make the business processes fit for now. And the other thing is content and communications. Explain it to people properly. Don't, if people can't use the technology, it might not be the fault of the technology. It might be that you just haven't explained to them properly what to do or what they need to do. So I say that there's a triangle, which you've got the technical platform at the bottom, but you've got your business processes, and you've also got the content and communication. And they are all equally important to make the thing work. So that was what we did. And it's been developed and regularly refreshed, and it was cheap, by the way. In the UK, you're going to hear about this later, but in the UK, they've spent £1.4 billion on court reform over the last 6 years, with not a lot to show for it. We ran this system, we developed it, ran it for 6 years, put at least 150,000 cases through it, and at the point that I retired last summer, we had not yet spent £1 million on the development and on the technical side, which is, thank you. Well, on that note, I think it's time for me to stop because you probably want your chai. So anyway, so it's lovely to be here, and do come and talk to me afterwards or get in touch with me later. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline.